Have you ever wondered what it's like to sit in on a magazine editorial meeting? Well, this is your chance. You're listening to Salt Lake Speaks, a monthly podcast where our editors, writers, and staff dig deeper into stories, chat with newsmakers, and talk amongst ourselves about arts, culture, food, music, politics, or whatever else might strike our fancy. After all, we are Utah's biggest fans.
The Natural History Museum of Utah's 5th annual Indian Art Market took place Saturday and Sunday, October 14th and 15th at the Rio Tinto Center. The juried show, one of the museum's most popular events, brings visitors face-to-face with some of the country's most talented Indian artists and their work. We are so pleased and honored today to have one of those artists with us, Susan Hudson, a member of the Towering House clan, and how do you say that? Kia'ani clan of the Navajo Nation, and a multiple award-winning quilter. This is Hudson's second visit to the Natural History Museum's show, and welcome back, and especially thanks for being here, but welcome back to Salt Lake City.
Well, okay.
So I'm interested in how your career as an artist began. I know you grew up in Los Angeles, actually. You live now on the reservation. Did you have a strong sense of your heritage and the heritage of Indian art growing up?
Oh, well, first of all, if I can introduce myself in the way that us Navajos
Oh, that would be great. Thank you very much.
You. Okay, Susan Hudson Nesle, Kia'ani Nesle, Deshini Basashin, Tabaha Dashache, Nakai Dene Deshinali. What I'm doing is introducing myself and my clans, who my mother and my father is, and my paternal and maternal family, and that way it has a lot to do with how we can greet each other, you know, our brothers or sisters or mothers or fathers. But for me too, it was kind of an easy way to do, because sometimes the men would come up and I'd have them introduce themselves first, and then I'll go, brother!
Because it places, your introduction places you in your family context.
And we know who
it's
we
not
are.
just Mary Brown Maloof. It's like son of, daughter, so they know who you are. What a great idea then. Why don't we all do that, I wonder? Because we don't know. No.
Okay. Well, how I started quilting was out of necessity. When we were little, we were dirt poor. I always say that, you know, we were so poor we didn't even know dirt was free. You know. And so we had to sew clothes, and that's how I used to do it. I learned how to sew by hand, and then from the excess fabric, we would make quilts because we needed that. But I'm a quilter. I come from a family of weavers. Hostine Claw, he's well known. Mary Wheelwright in Santa Fe built a museum around him, but he died before it opened up. My grandma Jane Ba Foster, or Hanaba, she was well known for her rugs, 2 Gray Hill rugs, and then my grandma Mary Ann Foster. Sometimes I'll see her stuff along with Hostine Claws in museums. And she's still alive, and so when I tell everybody who my grandma is, they'll like, oh my gosh.
Whoa, I know, that's what I'm doing. It's like, oh my gosh, I know, all these names I do know.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So that's where I came from. So I didn't have the talent for weaving. My grandma would always like, go herd the sheep or something, you know. So I didn't have the knack for that, but I did start having the knack for sewing. And I, out of necessity, like I said, when I had children and stuff, they needed shoes, so I would make a quilt and sell it. And then I knew at the time he was just Ben Nighthorse Campbell at the time, but now he's a retired Senator Ben Nighthorse Campbell, so I would make quilts for him. And so he started talking to me about my quilts and everything, because I was making the store quilts, you know, because I knew they would sell. And then he said, well, what do you really like? And I told him I like ledger art. I'm just fascinated with the ideal and the stories behind it. And so then he says, well, do something about it. So I said, okay. So I did make a ledger quilt, and I put the star in there, and then I put the horses, because to us Navajos, the horses did not come with the Spanish or with the European or stuff. They're part of our creation stories. They're the ones that the Yay, you know, when he travels the sky, that depends on our weather, depends on the horse that he's using. And so that's why I use a lot of horses and I use a lot of stars in there, because in the morning when we go out there and say our prayers, we do it to the east, and there's just a morning star up there. And then in the evening when we do our prayers, the evening star is there. So I try to incorporate everything, and then I know that Navajos aren't the only one that, for the horses. Also the Cheyennes, my second mother was Cheyenne, so that's where I learned a lot of different stories from. And so that's how I incorporated everything.
Can you explain a little bit, because listeners obviously aren't in the room and can't see the quilt that's in front of us. It's a plains quilted star, which I think most of you can imagine, and a bunch of galloping outlines of horses, almost ghostly, which are very reminiscent of ledger drawings, but I wonder if everybody knows what those are. And could you explain what those are?
Okay, I call this one Leading My Sister's Home, or Leading Our Sister's Home. What it is this year, when I start doing my quilts, my show quilts, it takes about 18 months, and I start getting the dreams and everything, and I feel like I'm blessed by the Great Spirit that I have these dreams, and also the spirit helpers of the quilters. And I start having these dreams, I start seeing pictures, and then there's a certain part where I'm driving home, and then I start formulating, I start seeing it, and then, so that's what I decided to do was this year, what I'm doing is bringing to the forefront missing and murdered Indigenous women since 1492.
Wow.
And so what I want to do was to show the story of, we don't know all the names of the women that are missing. And in the Cheyenne way, after you have started your walking on, you have 4 days left, and you go in spirit and you go visit who you need to and do what you need to do, and then on that fourth night, you go on to the next world. Well, sometimes the way that they have died violently, they haven't had time to have that closure. So there's a spirit that guides them to the next world. So on the star right here, I have the colors for a certain reason. I have the brown right here. The brown is for the Mother Earth, and the red is the blood that was spilt. And then the yellow is they're going towards, before that sun comes up, they have to be in the next world. And then in the blue right here is for turquoise. The Navajos believe that when you go on to the next world, you wear turquoise, because then when you greet it, they know you're Navajo. Oh. And so that's what I was doing in the abalone, because for our changing woman. So that's the story I did, and I made it into the ledger quilt. And I also, on the outline, is that the women of the spirits being led home. So that's what the story is. And it's done all with the red for all the blood that has been spilled.
So it's really a very sad quilt with a note of optimism. Where did you first see ledger drawings? Were you familiar with them growing up?
I wasn't. My second mother is Phyllis Big Left Hand, and she was a Cheyenne, and so we would always talk about different things, talk about arts. And she always says that, when you pray and everything and the Great Spirit opens the door for you, you take it. And so one of the things that we would talk about were the stories, because she was a descendant from Custer and Sitting Bull. It was funny because we got to that because we're going to have a family reunion. She goes, you know what my family reunion was? Everybody was like this, that, their family. Oh, my family, we did this. And she was like, really? Yeah, we did this. So her grandfather put a chair in the middle of the room and told her, you sit down. And they started talking. And then she goes, you go look at your family tree. And then he goes, now fight yourself.
Exactly.
And so along with that, we started talking about the stories of, the battle scenes, everyday life, marriages. And then that's how I learned about the ledger art, because she was talking about Fort Marion and how they were over there. So then, I was always curious, but I couldn't find during those years, couldn't find a lot of stuff about it. Then then it started coming out, emerging. Then I started looking at it, and I just thought it was just so beautiful, is the stories behind it, because that's somebody's story, her story, his story,
Yeah, there are accounts of battles and famous events and so on. I know you have what did I read about? Oh, you have a famous ancestor who was part of the Indian wars that are often depicted in those.
Yeah, Narbonne. He was one of our greatest chiefs, and he was killed. He was killed.
Right.
So.
Quite a heritage too. Now, a quilt, to most of us, is not a traditional Native American art. It's something that was spread around by missionaries. That's why there's quilts in Hawaii and quilts, Amish quilts, and all that kind of things. So I think it's an interesting mixture of cultures just in the medium that you're telling. It's an entwined story already just by nature of it being a quilt.
Well, what I did, when I was going through trying to decide where I wanted to go, because I knew I wasn't going to be a silversmith. I knew I wasn't going to be a rug weaver. I knew all that, but I knew I could sew.
Right.
And so I started looking into the boarding school because I knew I wanted to do a boarding school quilt. And then I started noticing in the pictures that the little girls are there sewing, but then when you look at their bed, you don't see the quilt there. So I was like, what happened to the quilts? So then I started doing a little bit more research and found out some of them were being sold, and I was like, well, that's kind of like slavery to me, child labor. And so I wanted to honor my ancestors by quilting, to take in what their work was. I can't imagine what they went through. I cannot imagine that. And, my mom didn't want me to go through that, so I never went to a boarding school. But I wanted to honor my grandmas by showing how beautiful that their hardship and their tears and, their bleeding and everything was for nothing. So I always honored them with this. I always tell their stories, and when everybody asks, well, where did you get my ancestors?
Right, right. So you grew up with all those stories. We also have with us today Susan Ruhlman, who curates this particular show and organizes it for the Museum of Natural History, the Natural History Museum of Utah, I should say. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the museum's collection of Indian art and artifacts. Are there any ledger drawings, or what sorts of things that you have? And maybe you can talk a little bit about your experience with Indian art.
Sure. I'm not part of the curatorial staff, so I don't think we have any ledger drawings out on display in the museum. We do have two beautiful exhibits in the museum, and one is a contemporary exhibit that covers the 5 tribes of Utah, and is a beautiful exhibit that goes through the more modern history of the tribes of Utah, and then and so the ancient native cultures of Utah, and really worth seeing, and something that I would encourage anybody that's interested in this sort of thing to come up to the museum to see. But I'm not an expert in what is in the collections, unfortunately. They are vast, so there may be something there with ledger art, I don't know. So we do have November 4th and 5th, a special event coming up called Behind the Scenes. The museum does it once a year, where they open up the collections and the public can go in there. The curators and collection management staff are all back there showing off what we've got that the public can't normally see when they come to the museum. So you could go into our anthropology collection and check out and see if we have ledger art there. And in fact, I probably should do that as well.
Well, that's fascinating, isn't it?
It is.
See what the museum has that they don't show.
And that's another really popular weekend at the museum.
Great, that's great to know about. So I'm a sewer. I used to make my kids' clothes. I used to make baby quilts for people. I've got a battered old Bernina that I always have worked on. And so I'm curious about things like the fabric that she's used for these horses is almost tie-dye looking, interesting different patterns of grays and mottled blues. It's not I'm wondering where you get your fabric.
Oh, I go all over the place. That's where I'm going to go in a little while, to the fabric stores. But I like to use a lot of batiks on my horses, because it gives it movement in a way, and it gives it the shadows and the valleys that it needs as a horse is going. And that way, then I won't have to, cut out pieces here, cut out pieces there. So
Right,
yeah.
right. It does, against the solid background of black and the solid border of red, these batik horse pieces just really give an illusion of movement and depth and a whole different kind of dimensionality to this quilt that we're looking at, which you'll be able to see online at saltlakemagazine.com. I'll write up a piece about my interview with Susan, and you'll be able to see examples of her work on our website. So I love how this all sort of echoes together. Your introduction of yourself puts you in a certain context, and that's what the introduction does. And these quilts also have that kind of introduction cultural context, because they're telling the story of a people and a culture, as well as just giving you this image.
Yeah, I wanted to do it so everybody can relate, because I made a quilt last year. It was I call it the Walk of My Ancestor, and it was it was showing the first 2 years of the Long Walk. And I had sold it to a collector that at the Gene Autry Museum. And when we were talking and negotiating, because my grandson is my business partner, so I was trying to get hold of him. And so he was telling my granddaughter his story about he had been in the concentration camps. And so he was telling her that the reason why they like the quilt and stuff, because they can change the clothing, they can change, the hairstyle and everything, and it related to his experiences there.
Right.
And so that's what I try to do. Is I know when my quilts are good is when I put them up and I let people look at them. And if somebody cries, then I know they understand what it means. And then, if they ask a lot of questions, but there are some people that look at it and just look at me and then walk away. Well, which is cool. That's okay.
Art, the same art can't touch everyone,
yes.
can it?
Yeah.
But yours is certainly moving, as I said before. So, Indian art and history is a big part of the Natural History Museum of Utah's collection and purpose, and they do a number of events and exhibits based on and relating to Native American art. And Suzanne, you have another exhibit or show coming up, don't you?
We do. In the spring, we do a Navajo rug auction in conjunction with Toatin Gallery in Durango, Colorado. The Clark family comes up and brings usually around 150 rugs. And we do a silent auction, a display and a silent auction, and it is just a beautiful art show. I encourage everybody to come up and see it, whether you think you want a rug or not, but I promise you, you will find one that will speak to you, and you may place a bid on. But we do that, and a portion of the proceeds benefit the museum, which is really nice. So that's our other one that I put on. Every October we do our Indian Art Market, of which Susan has been a participant in for the last 2 years. And then every spring we do the Navajo rug auction.
You can find more about Susan and her artwork at saltlakemagazine.com/podcast.